to learn a little bit more than what you know, and hopefully, I'm going to instill some motivation in you to learn more skills because it's very important to keep on progressing in our life. Every one of us can always improve from where we are today to the next level. And I thought once you do the self assessment, if you feel you need help, at least I'll show some pointers where you can get help without any stigmatizing yourself or really get professional help if really that's what you need. So that brings us to the next slide. Everyone agrees that life has become more and more complex in every field, and I thought only in the psychiatrists had to struggle with the changes, but all of us, life has not become easy. It has become more and more complex. But one thing we are going through is so unusual because we have been through for a long time with this corona, and nobody knows when this will end. Even we don't know when we will get the immunization. Everything is uncertain. That's a good breeding ground for bad stress reaction from us. So that brings the topic about the word stress. Do you know who we should blame that word? Canada. Until 1930s, nobody used that word. So we had a good luck of attracting a Hungarian endocrinologist who was stolen first by John Hopkins in the US, but for some reason he wanted to be in a cooler and nice place like McGill University in Montreal, and McGill University probably somehow attracted him because of his so much knowledge on this topic, and he borrowed the term stress from engineers. Until then, wartime engineers were using this term to know exactly what a structure can withhold in terms of the tonnage, how much can it hold. So that term, we all know there is a breaking point for any structure if you place enough strain and stress on that structure. So he thought the same thing applies to human beings. So because of that, from that day we all got stressed. If he didn't invent that word, we'll be all be comfortable like in the 30s. So then his favorite subjects were all animals. He wanted to put these poor animals under stressful conditions, and he had his own technique of stressing them. Today's animal lovers would have stopped him from doing this experiment in McGill, but he did subject them to three kinds of stresses: physical, psychological, and social in animal terms. And he was surprised. He had the luxury of doing autopsy and doing a lot of studies on them. He found all these stresses acted exactly the same way in the physical chemical systems. And then as he started to describe, he did observe the same thing in human beings. So we're not too different from higher forms of mammals. We just react the same way our body. And he gave the best description of how we adapt to stress. He described what is called general adaptation syndrome and the theory of how the body and mind adjust to a stress. And he gave a two nice words to describe: either we flight or fight. And we prepare ourselves for either of these two. But he forgot, which later psychologists added, there's another F called freeze. You all have seen people freezing during times of stress, like major tennis players and so on. So when you do the biological study of these patients, these animals, and of course patients, he found out there are two systems that help us to deal with stressors. One is called central nervous system. It, this system is one starting from the brain all the way to a gland called adrenal gland, just above both kidneys. And the cortical area, which is the outer area of the adrenal gland, responds to this brain stimulation. We call them corticosteroid system. You probably heard the word cortisol. But there's another primitive system called autonomic nervous system that also gets activated during stress, and it works through what is called adrenaline. And you all know the word adrenaline rush, right? So the adrenaline is released in response to all these stressors, And what does it do? This adrenaline and the adrenaline comes from the medullary part of the same gland. A medulla is the inner layer. And what they do, this adrenaline on this side and the cortisol on this side, they prepare the organism to fight or run away. How does it do? It shuts off things which are unnecessary, like digestion, immunity, puts all the energy in the muscles by increasing the heart rate, increasing the blood flow, breathing better, and increasing the blood sugar, which is necessary for fueling. And it makes the insulin system work better for a short time and keep the immune system at a lower level because the energy needs to be fighting this. And if the stress persists, unfortunately, this defense gets too far. It has consequences. It has consequences to the body, it has consequences to the mind, and then there are behavioral issues. And it's not a minor matter because these animals regularly developed ulcers. But in the human beings, it's a little more distressing is if this stress persists, it can cause selective damage to the brain. So highly stressed people have a form of brain damage that may not be recoverable. So it's not a minor topic. So let's go to the next slide. The stresses can come from several sources, but already we talked about biopsychosocial. Simply speaking, it can come from within oneself, within their body, in the physical system, or their own psychological system, or from outside, social and cultural. And these things, like a poverty and growing in a tough country, culturally, putting some strain, people have reactions of different kind. So how does stress really how does it cause damage? It can do three things. It can predispose you to several physical, psychological and problems, or it can bring out, precipitate it on a moment, and that can be difficult to reverse, or it can perpetuate, try to maintain your response, the negative one. So we'll be studying those things. Uh, but as we see, not all stresses are bad. We all react differently depending on our biopsychosocial strength. Some of us are so lucky to have strong nerves, and you all know that we all perceive stress differently, we all react differently, but eventually we have to know we do need stresses to make life spicy. Uh, Optimum level of stress brings the best in us, and that's what brings us to do good things. That you need to have that little compassion and a little challenge to bring the best in you. We'll discuss the topic of resilience a little later. Uh, but the thing is, the context of how the stress is perceived, or actually how the stress remains, has a big role because the bigger the stress, the bigger the reaction. But we have to take it into context. If a person on social assistance in the last week of the month, he loses the last $100 bill, that will devastate that person. Whereas for a millionaire like Nick Babbage, he can just ignore that $100. He can just walk away. So that context is important. Same way, acute short-lived ones, people can say, okay, I can tough it out. But the current one, like corona, is a chronic, slow but steadily eroding you. And that, if it is not a predictable duration, you don't know what to prepare for. You prepare for this, and the next thing will be you need another reaction. So these chronic stressors that slowly creep in without one's knowledge. Let's see the next slide, please. How do we know we are stressed? Even good things can make you stressful, like marriage. People who are married will tell us it's a fun for the beginning, then it becomes added stress. Childbirth, the same thing. The baby is so adored, but it brings a lot more stress, even though it's a positive event. There are two ways of assessing stressors. One is an objective, like a physician or a therapist administered one. And the second is the one I sent it to you. You can do your own evaluation of how you're doing in your uh, way of dealing with problems. So the objective ones used to be very popular in my younger days. We used to do all objective assessment of our patients, what are the stresses. So we have a big tool. And there was a person, Rajan Holmes, he devised a scale to measure the stresses. Do you know which is the highest level of stress in a human's life, which is scoring 100%? Is the death of a beloved spouse after a lengthy, good marriage. What is the next most stressful one is? It used to be the President of the United States job, but now I would rate it as 200% right now, the way it is. I wouldn't want that job even in my 100th life again. It's one of the challenging jobs. So we have measurements to know where you are in that scale. But the self assessment tool is simple for a person to do it and be able to recognize. But I find sometimes you don't know what's going on. And especially if it is a chronic, slow stress, you don't see it. You don't see it in your face. But you know who will find it? The dearest and nearest ones. It could be a friend, it could be a spouse. But I always find if you don't see your mother regularly, and if you see her at infrequent intervals, she'll tell you, boy, you need to see a psychiatrist right away. Because the objective assessment from a close relative, they can see it when you cannot see it. But I find it's good to have an objective assessment plus an evaluation from your friend so you know that you are okay. Uh, that brings the discussion to the next important topic is how do we people normally cope with this stressors? But you know that we all make an effort. I don't think anybody is thinking they're not dealing with the stress appropriately. They think they're doing the best. And that's what my patients with the serious mental illness, they all, even before marijuana became legal, close to 50% of seriously mentally ill patients, I don't know where they get money, do you know where they get it, but that is the statistics. 50% of them use marijuana like hard drugs of those days. And alcohol, I don't have to mention that. It's such a commonly used, but the worst offender is tobacco. 80% of my patients smoke tobacco excessively, not the casual ones. So there's something that everyone does, thinking that what they do will make it less painful, or maybe it will go away, or that's the best they can do. And this is where our old time philosophers and religious leaders were making efforts to correct the human species. There's been a lot of efforts being done for 3,000 years, teaching us good ideas. Uh, you know, but as I said, people don't listen and they think they are doing the best. And also, culture here can give you a tested solution. I think in a multicultural society like ours, it's so hard to know what works because each cultural group has a tested solution that works for a particular type of stress. And so that can also be used either appropriately or inappropriately. I don't want to go into the topic of religion because most modern psychologists and psychiatrists will use as religion as a method of coping with stressors if that is what you have developed beforehand. So the stress, how do we manage? We have the stress here, we have the way of perceiving the stress in the middle, and the way we react. So these three things are very important in our discussion. So mainly, like you can either reduce the stress or modify it or change the way you perceive it, and then take appropriate action. That's pretty much the thinking. But way back from philosophers, psychologists took over. You know that psychology actually arose from philosophy and psychiatry arose from this and the medical science put together. So the earlier thinkers, they thought the behavior that we show in response to stress comes from unconscious forces. So Freudians use the word defenses, and you all heard about various defenses, the most primitive one being denial, and the most advanced form of dealing with stressors are called sublimation. And I don't have to give explanation for denial. There are so many deniers all around us every day. But sublimation, I'll give you a good example. When you're stressed, you have so much of energy, so much of desire. So you produce phenomenal things out of that energy. And a good example is Van Gogh. I don't know whether any of you know. Van Gogh suffered from a very, very serious mental illness, which he will eventually kill himself. But in his lifetime, his creations were so phenomenal, but he didn't know how to market them. But if you look at all his pictures, you'll see the mental illness. You can see the time when he was depressed. You could see when the time when he was more contented, and so on. So let's see for a quick review of if you don't cope appropriately using the best defenses and using proper techniques, there will be consequences. And we'll discuss it a little bit more. But let's see who are the people who successfully handle stresses. We'll be talking about it a few times because one of the things I love about is gone time is past. Now, where can we go from here to become more resilient, more strength in handling problems? So it would be a good idea to know what the successful people have done so we can simply copy them. The successful people are people who recognize the stress and assess it properly and avoid using poor coping skills. They will not use denial. They will not, uh, you know, allow that to overwhelm their resources, and they know where the resources are, and so on. And we talked about already, the predisposing, precipitating, and perpetuating. All those things, if you're aware, you got a block there. But sometimes, uh, even though you know you are going through that, someone else has to interpret that to you. And this was what happens to chronically stressed people. Uh, they show premature aging. They may, show uh, such a poor inclination to fight problems. For example, they procrastinate. They don't know they have a problem. Even when somebody is offering a problem, they don't adhere to the full prescribed plan. This is what happens.
Hi, Red.
This is what happens to a lot of my patients because they have no idea, and unfortunately, they don't know uh, enough to read and become literate, become health literacy, and they don't. The non-adherence to treatment plan is very high in psychiatric population. So up to 80% of them stop their treatment 1 year from the time of treatment. So the next slide will tell us a little bit more about how we can, take efforts to improve. I think we can go to the next one. Yeah, I talked about some of us have nerves of steel, so very little is needed to improve our coping skills. But every one of us, we can always make ourselves one step better. So we can still learn a bit about what are the techniques of good management. In order to uh, prepare, you should first of all have a good motivation for change. And you need to be aware of the resources that will help you to change. So if you have a good father-in-law, then you know your financial stresses are well taken care of. So this kind of knowing it and properly using it is important. So we thought having a good resource is good, but it's good to sit down and analyze. Like a usual psychologist has this what, why, and how. This is how psychologists begin their investigations. So, what will tell us what's the main thing that's distressing at this time, and the why will tell us why that's so important at this time, what is its significance, and then how will really help us to think very deeply and do some brainstorming to know what are the options, and then narrow it down to more practical where you can have the resources. Ideally, you should do all the three and come back and sit down and be a smart person. I always use that uh, acronym and to say you need to have a specific goal to start with, and you should keep a target that you can measure. You're making progress, and you should be more action oriented, not like if you belong to some of the philosophical approaches. Certain cultures believe everything is God's will, so they don't take any action. And that philosophical approach is very common in certain cultural groups. So you need to take some steps. And the goals should be realistic. The R in the SMART stands for realistic goal. And the T is you should put a time in which you should accomplish. And then you have a small chart so you know what you're working at, where you are at. Are you at the target? Is it the time frame right? And so this is what sometimes we don't do. When we want to make some changes, we just have a no blueprint. It's like a building. You have to have a blueprint to build a house or whatever. So once you decide that time to do some actions, next slide, please. So a smart person, after analysis of how and what and why, will sit down and do certain simple things to improve their stress management. And that's again use another mnemonic, stress. S stands for you know staying in shape. I don't have to tell you. Eating the right diet, sunshine, exercise, proper sleep, avoiding addictive agents, they all come into keeping your body in shape. Knowing fully well that good physical health is good mental health, and vice versa. There's nothing you can accomplish without one or the other. You have to have both. Second is think. And this is what the modern psychologists have taken over from the analytical psychologists. If you remember, the psychoanalysis was ruling for a long time until the recent psychologists. Uh, I have a psychology person as a guest, Nandini. We couldn't take the time to introduce her, but the psychologists have improved this part, what is called cognitive psychology. This is what the most popular form of psychological help in modern times. What does it mean is, if you look, analyze it, what you think is what you believe. What you believe is how you feel, and how you feel is what you behave. So this thinking, feeling, and behavior are just like a chain reaction. So modern psychologists want to stop it at the beginning. So modifying the negative thinking, improving positive thinking, putting something in the negative to replace positive. So these are all very important part of helping you to make some you know, changes in the way you're coping. These the thinkers, I don't know whether we should say that to you now, because everybody thinks we're going through the worst time in the history of Earth. Uh, how many of you have seen the movie uh, The Midnight in Paris? It's a wonderful movie. So what's happening is every group, for example, as my age group think things are much better in the 80s and 70s. And I'm going to give you my own example. I've been a chief of psychiatry in three different places, and I only make any mistake three times. I don't repeat it. So the last time I was a chief was 1991. So when the first time I was so enthusiastic to do the job, second time I began to grumble. I used to stamp my feet. Things can't get any worse than this. That was in the late 70s. Things can't get any worse than this. Gosh, you guys administrators are bad, and used to shout, and that was so inappropriate. But I thought I was talking for my patients, and I want the best for them. Gosh, the third time I was a chief of psychiatry, I said, bring on the 70s. I need those 70s. So, in a way, what we are saying, this is the worst time. 40 years from now, somebody's going to say, this is the best time, in the late 20s, 2020s, things were the best. So, the meaning is every stage of life, human beings are unhappy. Summertime, people complain about too much of sunshine, heat. Wintertime, they complain about lack of sunshine, lack of heat. Every season is a problem. So basically, the thinking is what a big tool for a psychologist to help you. But you can think, and one of the things is that people take on challenges which are beyond their competence. So you really need to have that evaluation. Are you doing things within your level of competence? If not, doesn't matter. Either you go down to a lower level demanding work or improve your competence by taking extra courses and extra guidance. Uh, and that, I don't know whether to say this, the great Socrates was very upset. They invented writing. It was getting a little more popular writing. And his students were beginning to take notes, and he was so unhappy that this writing will make them stupid because they won't remember. In his days, everything had to be memorized and kept in their head. The Vedic scholars in those in the Indus Valley, they had to keep such a vast Vedic literature in their head, pass it on to their next generation. So, in other words, the present time is the best time. If you can think that way, it'll be a lot better. The next one is relaxation. I don't want to tell you too much. You all know how to relax, but you don't take time to relax. That's the problem. And always remember the modern relaxation techniques are based on calming your autonomic nervous system by putting a brake on the adrenaline system, which what is called acetylcholine system. So if you can meditate, you improve those chemicals. Always remember Italians and French, they tell us North Americans, sex is the best relaxation. We have to learn from those Italians when we have enough of them in our tree, and then easing pressure to find a safe exit and have healthy distractions like humor, all in moderate doses. And then finally, the sharing. That's very relevant to us. You know, we are lucky. You know, Rotary is a very good organization. Belonging itself is a very it immunizes you, and such good group, which is selfless and gives you a chance to show your skills. It's one of the things that we do need in our lives, a trusted friend, trusted group. But the sad thing is, sometimes my patients tell us, Doc, I go and talk to my trusted friend. I mean, 40% of my friends don't listen because they don't know what I'm talking about. Another 40% are happy that I have the problem, and they think you deserve it. Only 10 or 15% of people are very capable of listening and supporting. So the smart people know which is the right group, which is the right friend. So I always say my term, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, but a healthy gossip with this group will keep the psychiatrist away. So that the final one is the lifestyle. We have spent quite a bit of time. I particularly put the spirituality as an additional one and the time pressure because this is what modern North American life is all about. We don't have a culturally tested solution available, and then we are under time pressure compared to many other nations. So my time management could be a very important part of helping people learning stress techniques. So the next slide, please. All these measures are good, but sometimes it's not enough. You know that you don't have the level of competence or you don't have the guidance. So it's good to know without stigmatizing yourself to know especially after doing the self-evaluation. Uh, you need to know where the resources are. And I find we can start with the local branch of Canadian Mental Health Association because they specialize in it. In fact, they have specialists who will only talk about work-related stress, and they lend those speakers to anybody. And or if you go as an individual, they can teach you. And then if that is not an option, you can go to your primary care physician or any healthcare provider like counselors, psychologists, even modern day chiropractors. They have wellness programs and they blame doctors for not focusing on positive health. So, why stigma is not needed is if you look at what Confucius said, and which was echoed by his compatriots Buddha on on the Asian side, and Socrates on that other side, Europe, they all said true intelligence is not just knowing everything, but you should know what you know, how much you know, and you should also make an effort to know what you don't know. And this is where, uh, as soon as serious mental illness comes, that last part is gone. They don't even know they have an illness, and we call them lacking in insight. We are very derogatory on that. Unfortunately, that is an illness. It's from a brain damage. Those seriously mentally ill people have damage to their portion of the brain in the frontal area that controls executive functioning. So they really don't know that they don't know. So that's sad. But an intelligent, true intelligent person will know that he's not good in that area. He will ask for appropriate help. So that brings us to the final topic, which is resilience. What is resilience? It's all of us know about it, but it's the capacity to recoil from an adverse situation and try and stay in that healthy state for a foreseeable future. This capacity to recoil, unfortunately, is not uh, all of us are not equally good. Some of us come from an extremely good genetic background and had fantastic uh, childhood experiences, loving and nurturing two-parent family and all those things, everything you had. The sad thing is, even if all the things are going right, things can topple you. And if you have one event that can topple everybody, but there are certain forces that uh, you can already have or you can nurture during times of calm. You can't build resilience during a time of stress. You only when you recover, when you get better, when you focus to become stronger, you say, I don't want to go there again. And these things I have again put it into 4 C's. The first one I put it specifically because people only take good care of themselves when they get sick. That's sad because they really need that pain to make them to do things to get them out of the mischief, trouble. But they don't realize it's an ongoing process. You have to keep doing it. Weight loss is a good example. People go through a crash course, lose 20 pounds and take a nice picture, but then they don't bother, unfortunately. You have to maintain it. These are all like, it's same with our chronic mental diseases. They are lifetime diseases. Just getting better from one admission to a psychiatrist is not enough. We have to keep doing it. So that caring for self is already described to you. And like the next one is, I want to add a little bit more. The connection to social groups sometimes requires skills. People who don't want to belong to a group feel that they don't belong in that group or any group because they're lacking in certain skills. So building social skills. How do we shake hands? How do we look at a person and talk? How do we make some other person to like you? Dressing properly. All these things looks like simple, but they do help you to connect with the right group, right people, because the right association is such a big, important thing because they influence the way you think. You also will be influencing the way they think. And the next C is commitment. I've heard this saying, oh, this will pass. So I think in a passive way, okay, let's, you know, uh, wait for a while, it'll go away. But you haven't learned anything. So no need to wait for anything. Stay committed to make small changes and be focused on we talked about the goals, just stay on it. Even in the tough times, stay focused. And then finally, calm. See, that C is more important. Building resilience through these methods of relaxation, yoga, meditation is just equivalent to getting a immunization shot for COVID. So that there are some minor things to build resilience, which is adding small, like when you are being bothered by somebody, you need to know how to set limits. You need to uh, not to be a people pleasing person. You don't have to be unduly perfectionistic. You take responsibility for actions which are only within your area of uh, your assigned area or where you have competence. If not, you ask someone else to handle it. And you don't need to control others without any real need. And you don't need to look for approval from others for you to be happy. Being flexible, compassionate, being patient, not going for immediate gratification, and entertaining positive thinking as an active exercise. And there are people who are now doing mindfulness, taking a 2 minutes break every 45 minutes. Those kind of things look like so simple, but over a period of years, they build up a lot of stamina. So people with good resilience don't let themselves to get burnt out. You know the word burnout, right? People do the same mundane thing day after day without knowing that they should use these techniques. They end up getting burnt out with the low self-esteem, lacking in fun. They become fatigued, compassion fatigue. The COVID fatigue is one of the examples. And, they do not feel competent to doing anything. And that is a sad thing. They tend to procrastinate. Such people are the ones that procrastinate and no, they don't get any reward for themselves. They always think that reward is for somebody else. If somebody else does good, I need to tip them. But you need to tip yourself. You need to pat yourself on your back. So that probably I've done enough to a little bit distress you. So let's go to the next one, which is the happiest slide, to the last one, which is summarizing it. Uh, we were just talking about stress, what it is, how was it, the concepts were evolved, and what the stress uh, management, what is it? If you don't manage, what happens, and how we can improve the knowledge, how we can practice, and we'll think about what, why, and how. Anytime when you are in stress, try to use smart ideas, try to devise a technique and a plan for yourself, and then measure it, and then finally implement it under the demonic stress. We talked about it, and go to the resources in the community without any stigma. And finally, the little silver lining is I remember after third time being a chief of psychiatry, I could do that job in sleep, but I didn't want to. I had other interests. So you do become, each time you're beaten up, you become stronger. So without getting beaten up, you don't make a statue out of a granite stone without getting chiseled out all the bad things. So I thought I was chiseled all the bad qualities in me and I became a very good doctor. So all of us, stress is really a test. It molds you. So nothing teaches than your own personal experience. So don't get me wrong, I was always practicing psychiatry because I made my boo-boos with my earlier patients, which I didn't repeat on the next group of patients, knowing fully that even before retirement, I was probably still not doing the right thing because our science of psychiatry was still evolving. So same thing in you. All of you, you will be doing things that are not totally correct, but you only learn it later on. But you have to do that experiment, make your own mistakes. Like all your teenage children will tell you that, okay, you all know, you will find out that I have more experience in making mistakes, so don't do it. But they say, okay, we'll also have to experiment before we know it's true or not. So the final point is I have learned it several things in my own personal life, and I hope I shared some of that ideas with you. And so you will learn, at least from this lecture, what not to do. So towards the end of my medical school teaching, I kept on telling them, I can tell you a lot more about what not to do in psychiatry than what to do. I'm still learning. So that's with that, I'll end this talk and entertain any questions, anything you want to bring up. And I really will feel honored to do this in the new year. Happy New Year to you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just before there's any discussion for confidentiality, I'm going to stop recording.